Consider the central anomaly of the global economy. Nearly every nation on Earth relies on a single national currency to function. This setup is the result of specific policy choices made over the last 80 years to integrate the dollar into every layer of international finance. Whether it's a refinery in India purchasing crude oil or a tech firm in Brazil importing semiconductors, the transaction relies on the dollar to clear. To understand the scale of this reliance, we have to look back at how this financial monopoly was first constructed. The blueprint was drawn up in 1944. With World War II drawing to a close, a fractured international community gathered in New Hampshire to design a stable financial future. This meeting produced the Bretton Woods Agreement, where 44 nations agreed to peg the value of their local currencies directly to the US dollar. At the time, the arrangement was viewed as a safe bet because the dollar was explicitly backed by physical gold. Because the United States held most of the world's gold reserves after the war, they became the natural leaders of this new monetary system. By signing the agreement, these nations integrated their economic futures into the American system in exchange for post-war stability. That stability lasted until 1971. The U.S. had been printing vast amounts of paper money to fund domestic programs and overseas conflicts, and they were rapidly running out of gold to cover the dollars circulating globally. Faced with a crisis, President Richard Nixon made a sudden move. He completely severed the dollar's connection to gold. Overnight, the world's anchor became a fiat currency. The paper was now backed by nothing but faith in the U.S. government. But by this point, the world was stuck. Global banking and supply chains were already so deeply integrated into the dollar that walking away would have meant economic collapse. Without the gold backing, what actually guaranteed the dollar's continued power and international demand? In the 1970s, the U.S. negotiated an agreement with Saudi Arabia to ensure all global oil transactions would be conducted exclusively in U.S. dollars. This deal with OPEC tied the dollar directly to the energy grid of the entire planet. This flowchart shows the mechanics. If a foreign country wants to buy oil, they cannot pay with their own money. They must convert their local currency into US dollars to settle the transaction. Since every nation needs oil to survive, every nation is required to hoard US dollars. The Petrodollar system locks in a permanent global demand for American paper. Controlling the currency everyone is forced to use provides Washington with a remote control for the global economy. The U.S. can engage in weaponized finance, freezing a foreign central bank's assets or blocking a country's ability to trade on the international market. We saw this vulnerability exposed during the Trump era. Aggressive sanctions and America First policies proved to other nations exactly how much control they had surrendered to the U.S. Treasury. There is also the issue of exporting inflation. This scale illustrates how American money printing can have global consequences. When the U.S. prints trillions of dollars, it floods the system. Because foreign nations hold massive dollar reserves, that printing press devalues their savings. This mechanic forces developing countries to absorb the economic impact of American domestic debt. These lessons have triggered a reaction. Emerging global powers are now seeking alternatives. This is the push for de-dollarization. The BRICS nations are currently building payment networks and trade corridors designed specifically to bypass the U.S. financial system. Simultaneously, foreign central banks are accumulating physical gold at a high pace, building a hard asset hedge against Washington's influence. But replacing an entrenched financial standard that took a century to build is a massive logistical challenge, which leads to the question, can the Indian Rupee step in and replace the dollar as the world's reserve? India is currently positioning itself by expanding direct rupee trade agreements and leveraging its economic growth to settle accounts outside the dollar system. However, there are significant barriers. Capital controls limit the rupee's movement, and the Indian bond market isn't yet large enough to absorb global savings the way U.S. treasuries do. Dollar dominance was built on decades of strategy and geopolitical leverage. Replacing it will take decades, not days. India has potential, but if the dollar's era does end, we have to ask, are we ready for the chaos of the transition, or will the world simply find a new financial master?